Hi, David.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
Well, I think the world's kind of going to hell these
We're going
days,
to
but
talk about that.
it's nice to see you.
It is good to see you. We're going to talk about the world going to hell. I should say, just in case there's anyone out there who doesn't know who you are, which seems unlikely, given the fact that you appear on real TV, in addition to occasionally gracing fake TV with your visage. Anyway, you are David Corn.
You are not Jim Pinkerton.
And I'm not Jim Pinkerton, but we expect Jim Pinkerton to be back down the road.
I hope so.
You run the Washington operation for Mother Jones, and also like appear on real TV. It's amazing. You write books and stuff. You break huge stories. You alter the outcome of presidential elections by revealing tapes of Mitt Romney saying stuff he shouldn't have said at fundraisers.
Right.
We all know who you are. And it's good to see you back on Blogging Heads. You were one of the very first people to appear on Blogging Heads who was not either me or Mickey Kaus. Do you know how long it's been since you first appeared, David?
Oh, I don't want to know. Don't go to the videotape. But I guess that you can call us the OBs.
OBs for?
Instead of the OGs. OBs, original Blogging Heads.
I get it.
Okay.
It's been 9 years, David.
A little urban reference for you, Bob.
Well, out here in the suburbs, we need all the urban references we can get. So yeah,
the world. I can't wait for the 10th anniversary gala you're going to have. No doubt Hillary Clinton will speak there. There'll be lobster, and we're just going to have a grand old time.
I'm gonna model it. It's only a year away, and I'm going to model it after the 100th New Republic anniversary gala that you and I both attended, and where we saw each other recently. Except it'll be bigger and better.
and Bill Clinton will speak for 2 hours instead
of one, and he'll say 10% more than he said. So the world is falling apart. Where do you want to start? Domestically with Ferguson, internationally with the collapse of the Iran talks, ISIS, name it.
Well, let's all group it together and talk about the person who tends to be blamed the most when things go wrong, and that's the president.
Yeah.
I was on a panel recently with a political consultant, and we were just pondering the fact, or the idea, the supposition, that is it now more or less impossible for a president to be successful, at least to be seen as successful, given what's going on in the world, the great uncertainty we have, and the highly political, divisive, universe that he, or maybe one day she, operates within.
Mm-hmm.
And I tend to think that there are some fundamental shifts that have been going on for a long time, and that there's a lot of uncertainty, and it can go from people looking at beheadings in Iraq, getting freaked out unnecessarily over Ebola, and then we see the tragedy that's unfolding as you and I speak in Ferguson, with a lot of rage there, and it all sort of to the average person, let alone anyone involved in any of these episodes, can really feel like things are just being derailed. There's a reason why before the last election, 67% of Americans said that the country was on the wrong track. And if you compare the country to where it was in 2007, 2008, there are a lot of metrics that say that we're in a better position. I understand all the arguments. Personal income hasn't gone up, although the market's gone up and the 1% have done well. But still, level of employment, the war, what's going on in Iraq now is terrible, but it's not as bad as when, in the mid-2000s. Afghanistan is still ongoing, but it's a little less of a knotty problem. You got things like, Israel and the Palestinians going in the wrong direction. We are talking to Iran, even though it's, it hasn't, given us all, the productive outcome we want yet. There are reasons why we're in some ways we're in a better place, but by a preponderance majority, most people say, God, things really suck now.
Yeah.
And I think it's because, expectations are not being met, and that regardless of what's happening in any one of these episodes, that we just live in an age of so much more uncertainty, And I think people realize that's not going to change. And they're antsy about it. The economic security, retirement security, even if you get a job, nothing happened to the people who gave us the recession of 2000, 2008, so that could happen any moment, right? I just think people are living kind of on the edge, as Aerosmith might say, or sing.
They are living on the edge, yeah. I mean, it's certainly true that in objective terms, if you compare the economy now with the economy that Obama inherited, way, way better.
Yeah.
If you look at that point in time. You know, at the same time, as you kind of went through the litany and tried to kind of put the best face on these things, I still wasn't totally persuaded. There is a lot of bad stuff happening.
There is.
I do think there's a lot of unnecessary fear, and what worries me is that the fear has a way of making things worse. Not in the case of Ebola. That's a case where getting too scared probably isn't going to make the disease worse. But with things like ISIS, you get scared, you overreact, and before you know it, the clash of civilizations has become a self-fulfilling prophecy. You overreact, you aid their recruiting, they cut off more heads to help their recruiting, you overreact again, and so on. In fact, I think that's almost been the story since 9/11, us overreacting and feeding the fire until the clash of civilizations is becoming a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, and some people would connect several of your dots by reference to it, right? Afghanistan, Israel, Palestine. They might even throw in Iran, even though, of course, there are intra-Islamic conflicts that are, between they are on the opposite side of the game from ISIS. But still, you can imagine an American looking at this and going, "Oh God, this, it's only growing, it's only getting worse." And then compounding it in real terms is the inability of Congress to do stuff. The Iran nuclear deal is a good example. That should just be a no-brainer, I think. And if you ask why we couldn't come to a deal, it has to do with domestic constraints on both sides, on Iran's side and ours. But certainly, if we had just caved and met all of their remaining demands, that would have been way better than no deal, and would have been in our interest, I think. And yet we can't do that because of the domestic political situation. So count me as kind of alarmed, although part of my alarm has to do with fear about undue alarm. Okay.
Well, there's sort of like a game theory thing going here too. It does seem that conflict tends to, move towards greater conflict, and that the extremists on each side, I hate using a cliche like that, are empowered and often get the better political position, and that keeps the conflict moving ahead. People who want to, cut deals, compromise, settle for half a loaf, or say, wait a second, maybe this threat isn't as bad as they say it is, and we can deal with it without going overboard, are the ones who tend to get cut off at the knees politically. Before the Iraq invasion of 2003, a few of us were saying Saddam Hussein may be a problem, but there may be other ways short of invasion to deal with this.
Yeah.
And yes, there'd be some uncertainty in that, and perhaps we should let the inspection regime continue. And there's always a chance that 5%, 1%, 10%, I don't know, that if you think the regime that inspection process is working, that actually it isn't, and something's going on, right? You have to allow for imperfection in any system, but that's a harder position to say. Well, to make the cost benefit analysis, that it's better not to have an invasion, to have another program that may also not work, but that might well work or might give us most of what we want, and maybe delay his weapons programs, which turned out not to exist, for 10 years rather than make sure they never happen, and we can see what happens in the intervening decade. I mean, that type of argument is very easy to blow away with fear, with sort of attacking the uncertainty of it and saying we can't take that chance. And that sort of dynamic comes again and again and again, particularly in international relations, but also at home and in a political sphere. So if Republicans want to have an immigration reform, bipartisan deal with the Democrats, with the president, which they did have, on their side, it was not sustainable politically because people didn't want them cutting a deal with the enemy, president, Democrats, and a lot of them didn't want the policy. They didn't want any, what they call amnesty or any pathway to citizenship. And so these conflicts, often politically or internationally, end up to the benefit of, folks who are, who want to take the most extremist or the most diehard position, right?
Not only that, but the extremists on opposite sides are actually playing a non-zero-sum game with each other. So Bibi Netanyahu...
I see what you did there.
Where is my book? Could I... never mind.
Yeah, for those of you too young to remember, I wrote a book called It
was called Non-Zero. Where is it?
Non-Zero. Okay. So he's thought a lot about this. But anyway, don't show the book. Just get on your point that I interrupted.
So, like Bibi Netanyahu and Hamas are playing a non-zero-sum game. It's a win-win. Hamas keeps Bibi in power. Bibi keeps Hamas in power. Extremists in the Democratic Party keep the rhetoric kind of at a level that allows extremists in the Republican Party to make political hay, and vice versa. So in general, with these conflicts, another example is with the Iran nuclear deal. The guys who don't want to deal in Iran, the extremists, are on the same page as the Republican hardliners and some Democratic hardliners, who supposedly consider those extremists in Iran the enemies, and yet they want the same thing. They both want to sabotage a deal. So this is the problem is the non-zero-sumness of extremism. Yeah.
And I do think I hate to sound like an old fart. The good old days, as Molly Ivins used to say, were probably neither good nor
they were old, but they were.
I guess they were old, but they're not at the time. And there used to be a process in Washington where, like, the Bob Doles of the world, with the Democrats would get together, cut a deal that each side didn't like, but it took something at least. Ended in an argument for a couple of years, and then you kind of see how the deal panned out,
right.
And then you go try to win elections and come back and say, okay, let's go back at those tax breaks that we didn't like, that we had to give up to get something else. And it was sort of herky jerky, often diluted progress, but it kind of kept the system going. And we got to face it, our system was designed on purpose to make it really hard to do things. It's not a parliamentary system where each party gets their shot for a few years. They do basically everything they want, and then the voters either like it or they throw them out and give the other party a shot. And and I think we talked about how the public is is justifiably or not justifiably freaked out a lot of stuff, and they look at Washington and they see this not only these old institutions that move slowly, but they can't do anything, and they really seem out of sync with the modern world, where if you yourself want a pair of bunny slippers, you could, while I'm talking, call up another screen and make sure they're there by 8 a.m. tomorrow morning with your coffee and newspaper, right? So there's a lot that we can get really quick these days.
Yeah.
Information, consumer goods, you can go through an online relationship inside of 2 hours, start to finish, and yet they look at Washington, and it just, the fact that it's still dominated by old white guys doesn't look too good either, but it just really looks like it's just not in step with the rest of the world.
But I think it is, in the sense that I think what paralyzes Washington is partly the information technology. I mean, our system was also designed to create a certain buffer between the people doing legislation in Washington and their constituents. The Senate, in particular, in the Federalist Papers, it's wherever it's defended on grounds that it would be insulated from the winds of passion and so on. And now,
just say people won't check. In Federalist Paper number 17.
Yeah, I don't have to worry, do I? Now. Wherever very old and dead people defended the structure of the Senate, this is the way they defended it. And now it's partly, the fundraising. They got to go back to their district all the time. They're always in touch with the donors, but there's a public opinion poll every day. They know what their constituents are thinking. This wasn't part of the original plan. But there's one other thing which you kind of allude to, is that it used to be when they were in Washington, they were in Washington. It's like when you and I were in college, we were confined. That campus was the place where anything socially was going to happen. There was no Facebook. There was no nothing. And I think that's one reason in the old days, these Democrats and Republicans would have drinks together. They were stuck in Washington. There was nothing else to do. And they hung out together.
They couldn't tweet. The wives were generally back home, and they were able to do other things together.
Okay, so there was that they could do. But then they would get together to talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, there is this rap on Obama that he doesn't hang out. He doesn't drink bourbon with Mitch McConnell. I know one chief of staff to a Democratic senator, and every time I run into him every 6 months, he complains that Obama hasn't invited this senator to the White House to watch a movie. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Is this what the senator's really upset about with Obama? Now, he may not be reaching out. He may not, be the LBJ, intimidate or charm your way to success in Washington. But, I mean, it may just be that my overarching rule of life, which is there's not much social evolution beyond high school, still stays true in Washington, and this stuff might matter. Although I just really hate the whole the whole meme that Obama's aloof because he doesn't pal around.
Yeah, but there is a difference, right? I mean, surely if you compared his golf schedule to Clinton's, you would find that Clinton was making use of the golf time.
Yes.
To bond with people. Sometimes it was just Vernon Jordan, not some senator. But same with Eisenhower. Eisenhower used to play golf with congressmen.
Yeah, there may be. I mean, the bonding issue may be important to get things. I'm not sure it would make a big difference given how the overarching political dynamics have put people into such corners.
Right.
And the reward, I would say, more so amongst congressional Republicans than for Obama. The reward is when you sort of line up with your extremist voices,
mm-hmm.
or at least you don't want to be, challenged by them. And so, you have, guys like John McCain who led the effort once upon a time in the Bush years to work with Joe Lieberman on climate change. When was the last time you heard John McCain say anything about climate? I mean, he was really out there pretty early on. Newt Gingrich, as well, sat on a couch for a commercial with Nancy Pelosi to advocate addressing climate change.
Yeah.
There's a reason why those guys who are, both non-ninnies, who can, care about, science and policy and things other than just politics, have totally run away from that issue.
What is the reason?
It's because what's happened within their political world, that it's now it's a disqualifier for a Republican to talk about climate
change. Why
change.
is that? Is that because of the Koch brothers, or is that because of what Fox News does to grassroots opinion, or what?
I think it's a combination of things. I think part of it is just because it's become a Democratic, Obama-identified issue for the Republican grassroots.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Koch brothers and Rush Limbaugh and sort of the conservative infrastructure have done a very good job of making this one of their top red lines. That's
mm-hmm.
kind of a mixed metaphor there. But, in terms of self-identifying as a conservative, you can't be a serious conservative if you buy the Obama line on climate change. So it's been a tremendously well-financed, well-calculated backlash because, it wasn't too long ago when we had a little less gray, when George W. Bush was president, that he himself admitted acknowledged that there was human-induced climate change. He came up with what he called a voluntary program for businesses to cut back on emissions. It wasn't good enough, but at least accepted the premise that there was a problem. And even his dad went to Rio for the first climate summit.
Speaking of bushes, I have a question that I'm genuinely interested in. I don't know if there's any evidence. No, I'm genuinely interested in the other stuff, but I'm genuinely interested in this.
We're just free associating here. We have, this
is... It's the bush. I have a question about my garden. No, I have a question about bushes. Do we know enough to say whether Jeb Bush's foreign policy would be more like his brother or more like his father? Because if it was more like his father, I think I'd take his foreign policy over Hillary Clinton's.
Yeah,
I would. I totally would.
I knew you were going there. His dad did invade Panama in a pretty silly.
That was bad
operation.
I had almost forgotten that he.
He sort of continued on some of the stuff that Reagan went deep on. He had to accede to the history that was beyond his control in South Africa. It was certainly
he did his one big war. Got Security Council authorization, and he differs from his son in that George W. in that regard.
And he didn't go into Baghdad.
Right. He was basically kind of a realist on foreign policy. The Panama thing, I don't know. Jacob Weisberg once said he invaded Panama to get a capital gains tax cut or something. Worked politically. And what it really was a kidnapping. He just went and snatched Noriega, but that was totally like a violation, I assume, a violation of international law, and to his discredit. Still, Hillary...
But to answer about Jeb Bush, I would say that prior to George W. Bush becoming president, we didn't know that much about his foreign policy.
No, we thought he was going to be he was talking like a realist before 9/11. He was
talking like a realist. He was talking about having some humility in the world for the United States. Which, imagine if Obama said that today, the right would jump all over him as yet another apologist. But, after 9/11, of course, Bush overreacted and, fell in line with the neocons and the go to war crowd. Right. So prior to that, he had no, I think, obvious predilection overall for the neocon position. Although he probably was far more pro-Israel than his dad had been. Remember, his dad had taken away some credits for housing Israeli settlements, and it created a kind of what now it's kind of funny because it was a very minor step, but it created a major rift with the Israeli government at the time, and people like James Baker, Secretary of State, were seen as kind of Arabists, and the oil money connection.
Mm-hmm.
There's one thing that a Texan and a Saudi has in common, right? They both like the oil business.
Right.
But with Jeb Bush, I just say that I'm not even sure it would matter what he said now.
Yeah.
It would depend probably on what the external circumstances would be. Now he's married, we know, to a woman from of Latin American descent, and he's been sort of back and forth a bit on immigration. He had a more moderate position. Then he wrote a book in the country where he wrote in his book, and he's been trying to straddle that line very awkwardly, to be kind about it, in the last 6 months. But he certainly has some real world experience in looking south, at least. The Middle East, I don't know, could we literally have a third war in the Middle East launched by a Bush?
We probably could. Well, he may.
41, 43, and 45. It's like every odd president just send a force to the Middle East.
Well, he might well inherit one, if not two. In a way, the question is, how firmly entrenched are the neocons just within the conservative movement? What is the source of their leverage?
Now you're getting to one of my favorite subjects. And before you go, I'll say that I'm not convinced that Jeb Bush is going to run.
Right.
He strikes me as a boxer who is, 20 years past his prime. And if someone, maybe like in all those, great movies, if someone comes along and offers him enough of a purse and there's a love interest, then he'll,
the color of money, the color of money.
Try to lose a few pounds and, and take it on. But I think, this 2016 primary, which is really what you're talking about when you talk about the neocon influence within the conservative circle, that's going to be one of the fulcrum points. Can you have more than one fulcrum point? I don't know. I mean,
one per lever, I would say. But anyway,
maybe but actually, I've been reading a lot about space time. So maybe in space time you can have multiple fulcrums.
This is a Pinkerton question.
Well, we'll jot it down and send it to Jim.
Yeah.
But I think we've seen already this feud between Rand Paul, who is skeptical on intervention, although he's becoming more hawkish by the week.
Yep.
And Dick Cheney and John McCain wing of the party, and and looking at 2016, because really it's the only thing we can do these days that's fun as a journalist. I see literally a three-ring circus. I don't mean metaphorically, and I know when people say literally, they always use that word wrong, ironically, which they use wrong as well. But I think the Republican primary will be a set of sub-primaries in which you will have the Tea Party primary, maybe, just think of Rand Paul versus Ted Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
You will have the religious right primary. That could be Huckabee versus who else is that ilk?
Sarah Palin goes back.
Not Sarah Palin, but there are others who sort of who have that claim. You'll have the governors, Kasich, maybe Walker, maybe Chris Christie, maybe Mike Pence, who will be interested in the funding class will be interested. Jeb Bush might be a party to that. Ben Carson, an outsider who might be part of the religious right Tea Party, overlapping those circles. Marco Rubio sort of has a foot in a couple of different circles there, and they're going to find some big things to argue about. And if Rand Paul starts showing any traction, as this whirling dervishes, if that's how you say it plurally, continues, you can bet your Republican dollar that the McCains and the world and the Republican establishment, as their heads are exploding, and I'll include Bill Kristol on that, will do anything possible to take him out at the knees. This will make the Godfather movies look mild.
Yeah.
They will do everything they can. They will not allow Rand Paul to get a strong footing as they. And I'm talking all before the first vote is even cast.
Right.
So the neocons, I think this election will be a fight for their influence within the party and within the conservative movement.
Well, meanwhile, they seem to have Hillary's ear. I mean, I can, so.
That's great. I mean, I think Hillary is still trying to be all to all, and I think that's a problem in a lot of ways. I do think that, push comes to shove, she tilts hawkish rather than dovish.
Yeah.
And, there could just be that's what she believes. I also think, and it's hard to say this without, being a little bit on PC, I suppose, and that is, I think that Hillary has made a calculation, which I would tend to agree with just on pure political terms, that the first woman president elected in this country will have to be seen as somewhat of a aggressive son of a bitch or daughter of a bitch, whatever you want to call it, just someone who's really, who you're not going to worry about is going to get, soft in the face of some terrorist event or something, or some threat to America. That's why I think Elizabeth Warren, God bless her, as Joe Biden would say, and who I'd love to see, run on policy grounds, might have a hard time projecting the toughness of a commander-in-chief.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Hillary, Clinton probably thought long and hard about this, and that if you want to run not just for president but run for commander-in-chief, you have to show this certain degree of what I would call conventional toughness and strength, right? And so if there's a toss-up, the politics seem to dictate which way she should go.
Yeah, although there's evidence that it isn't just for show. I mean, in Bob Gates,
I'm not just saying right. It's purely for show.
In Bob Gates' book, apparently there's an anecdote where she says about Iran, well, why don't we just have Israel bomb them and solve the problem for us? I mean, how naive is it to think that if Israel bombed them, that would solve the problem, right? I mean, now she may have just been throwing it out hypothetically, but I don't know. And also, she's
I'm just spitballing here.
yeah, I'm just spitballing here, and I did just push the button, and the bombs are going off. So I don't know. She's been, and on Iran, which is not. The Iran negotiations are not that symbolic a test of macho in the way that, like, bombing somebody is, and yet she's moved way to the right of things she said when she was Secretary of State on the negotiations issue.
I take your point. I still think that that Iran can be used politically as a sign of strength or weakness, rightfully or wrongfully, and it just is, you see. The right and the McCainiacs out there more or less saying that any deal, any conversation with Iran is some form of appeasement.
Mm-hmm.
And that, in a lot of ways, is a message that I think gets more airtime in our media world because there aren't, it gets back to an earlier point, there aren't a lot of people out there saying, Iran's a bad place. They support terror, but it's best to cut some sort of deal, even if it's imperfect. Mm-hmm. The Democrats don't want to say that politically to support the president negotiations. If asked, they'll come up with a sort of mealy-mouthed explanation of why they support negotiations and why this is a good thing. But by and large, they're not out there making a possible Iran deal a positive issue. Right. Well, the other side is making a possible Iran deal a terrible negative issue that they want to talk about almost as much as they want to talk about, wait for it, Benghazi. Which is that I now call Benghazi. After the came out.
I mean, fear is always an easier game to work than reason. It's true.
I think if you're running to be the first female president, that's a big part of your calculation and how you.
Yeah, but the problem is she's going to keep feeling that way when she's in the White House.
Of course,
I've got to act like a man. So it is in that sense. Her posturing is a good predictor.
Yes, I'm not saying that that she's going to change stripes and become an Ed Markey Democrat after getting elected. And I love that. That's not an insult, Ed.
No. Well, that's what I was wanting.
No, I think you're it's a real concern. Mm-hmm. It's a real concern when we see what's going on, and we have some tough calls, and we know where she was on the Afghanistan pullout. We know where she was in terms of supporting Mubarak, and we know she was hawkish on Libya. Which I'm not saying these are the wrong positions that to have held at some point, but. It was, she was sort of a status quo preserving, light hawk. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Okay, so quickly, if you have time, let's segue to a couple of just very recent issues, and I'll get your take on them. First of all, here comes a masterful segue. You were talking about how Bill Kristol would, if necessary, go after Rand Paul Godfather style. Well, last time I remember him going after somebody Godfather style. It was Chuck Hagel when he was up for nomination, and there was all this character assassination. He's anti-Semitic, blah blah blah. And actually, the character assassination was so crude that some of the establishment kind of rallied around Hagel. I wrote in his defense because as a way to oppose Kristol's whole creepy line of attack. But I was not under the illusion that he would be a great Secretary of Defense. He's really inarticulate, for starters.
Well, I have. We all remember his confirmation hearings, which were really painful to watch. He just had a hard time articulating.
He's always been that way.
His positions, and particularly when McCain tried to put him in various boxes,
right?
And it was, and he seemed, he seems to project, this sort of good-natured guy who has attempted to think through issues before the vote on the invasion of Iraq. I mean, he voted the wrong way, but
but his heart was the right way.
But he raised a lot of key questions. I'm voting for this authorization, but here are all the things I worry about, and I hope we can find a way not to do this.
Right.
It was one of the more, sensible and prescient statements made by any Republican at the time. So I mean, I think it's a cliche, but someone who served in Vietnam, who understands, the impact on the ground for military action, is likely to, not always, but likely to have that extra pause, is what he and his buddies went through, and should we put other Americans through that? I thought those were all very good, qualifying qualities. But the way he talked about foreign policy and the ability to project certain confidence in his own ideas,
right,
was lacking. And it was like, and then you add it to the fact, there's a lot in the press about this, that the Obama, inner circle is particularly tight and hard to, project into unless you have a forceful position. In the book I wrote, you plug yours, I plug mine, Showdown on Foreign Policy Matters, Hillary Clinton, Susan Rice, very forcefully were able to sort of get into be crucial parts of the conversation, whether, Obama accepted their views or not at the end of the day. They were at the table. People listened. What they said really mattered. And it seems that was a difficult thing for Chuck Hagel. You could say the same thing about Bob Gates and so on. So, I mean, but I do have to say, it was a pretty ugly defenestration. Pushing, the way he was pushed out, and some of the anonymous quotes from people in the administration about a fellow who does come across as a decent-minded, public servant.
Yeah, I mean, they may have figured out that they'd do it fast. I guess the hope is to confirm a successor before the new Congress comes in, when it'll presumably be easier. But it'll be easier now than then. I don't know, but yeah, it was. I mean, he was he was also oddly kind of prone to, sometimes almost hysterical outbursts. That was the weird thing. He was very reluctant to go to war, but then he had a tendency to overreact. And like with the ISIS thing, he had the craziest quotes out there about how threatening ISIS was. So it was an odd combination, but he is, I think, a good guy who does think, I really have a lot of respect for him, and I agree it's kind of a shame. Final super topical question. Any thoughts on Ferguson? I mean, as we take this last night with the verdict.
We've kind of buried the lead. I think purposefully we wanted to talk about something else. Like many Americans, I was up late last night watching and, of course, tweeting. That's what we do these days, right? And I think it's hard to have too many original thoughts on the matter. It was obviously, I think, a dumb idea to do this at 9:00 at night. 30 seconds into the prosecutor's statement, my 13-year-old daughter turned to me and says, "I know where this is going." It was quite clear that he was acting more almost as like a defense attorney for Officer Wilson. Yeah. And he was just very tone deaf, which made it hard, to sort of listen to. I got angry listening to it, and I understand that these sometimes can be hard cases, and evidence is hard to sort through. And in that instance, I think there were two sort of interpretations here. One is because the case was such a high-profile case, he did things that the grand jury wouldn't do in most cases. They brought in expert witnesses. They, the prosecutor didn't try to nudge them in one direction or the other, so it was said. And the whole presentation last night looked like it was the defense of the person who was in the indictment seat. And so now, did they do that because it was so high profile, and they wanted to give every benefit of the doubt to the person who might be put in this difficult position with indictment? In case I think most defendants would say, "Me next, please."
Yeah.
Or was it done because this would lead to this outcome and make it harder to get an indictment? In which case, the prosecutor, who like every member of his family has served in the police, and in 26 years he's never indicted. Whatever. We've all heard these stories. He's never indicted a cop. And so you have, from the same set of unusual facts, two polar opposite interpretations, which goes back to our original point. In a divisive, world, each side has plenty of data points to make their case, and to more importantly, believe the other side is not just wrong, but falsifying the case for ulterior racist motives. And that makes it really sad, and that's why, in some way, I don't believe the president's Green Lantern, so please don't write in about that. But I do think that the speech last night that he gave, I just thought was disappointing. It was flat. It seemed to me he hadn't thought through yet what he should say, what his role could be here. Much different from the speech he gave when he announced his immigration executive action, which I thought was one of the best things he said in a long time. It was all about big values, and he was passionate about it. After the Ferguson indictment, it seemed like he was just kind of almost mulling aloud in public. And I understand all the difficulties, and I'm not sure what speech I would have written for him had I been working in the White House. But perhaps maybe the thing was to wait. Yeah.
No, it was tough. Well, first of all, I don't know enough about the case of the law to know whether there should have been an indictment. On the one hand, I'll say, in defense of the grand jury's decision, certainly the evidence was not consistent with what had originally been some of the most damning versions of what Darren Wilson did, right? Like the idea that, okay, the guy's just standing out there, he's got his hands up, you start shooting at him. No, apparently, blood in the car, blood on the gun, and so on. It looks like there was an up-close encounter, fine. Yeah. So I don't know, but I will say that the thing about prosecutors is they just naturally consider police to be on their team because they are. They work together all the time to put cases together. And in fact, this county prosecutor, I don't know whether he's worked with police in this particular municipality or this particular cop, but that's what they do basically. You almost wonder if there shouldn't be an automatic change of venue. Any prosecutor in any county is going to kind of feel cops are on my team. But still, this prosecutor is working in the county full of the cops who are on his team. And, does he really want to go to work the next day having put one of them away? No, he doesn't. No prosecutor does. It's an inherently awkward situation to ask a prosecutor to look at a case involving a cop.
No, I think it's a real good point, and you wonder if there's a way to sort of have any sort of change venue, any sort of independent, person. The IA, there are IA departments, internal affairs offices in police departments to investigate police corruption, not necessarily acts like this. And, they're always fraught with difficulties in bringing cases. And if they do their job well, they end up being hated and targeted sometimes. And if they don't bring cases, people think they're protecting their buddies. And there's an inherent conflict of interest in this situation. And that's why it's really, really, really hard for people to have faith in the process, particularly when they see all these other external circumstances, family ties to the department, a history of not bringing these sort of cases, changing, the rules a little bit, or not, of all the, grand juries almost always bring down indictments if it gets to a grand jury. So, of course, not happening this. And when you're in the black community and you're the lower end of the economic spectrum, you think you're at the bottom end of the ladder. There's a lot of reason to feel resentment. You got a mainly white force in a largely black town, so it looks like there's a lot, rigged in the big picture to begin with. And so, your perspective is, how can this system which has me where I am and where they are, how can they come up with a fair, resolution here? It's very tough. You had Rudy Giuliani meet the press, the day beforehand, getting into a fight with Michael Eric Dyson and saying, if you people weren't killing each other, you wouldn't have all these white cops in your community. You people, I mean, it's us. There is, it's Americans killing Americans.
Right.
And having American cops coming in. I don't feel like Barack Obama in 2004 now, but I mean, he immediately went to this very tribal analysis, which a lot of people get to on their own. Yeah. On each side.
I mean, it tends to be the case that people kill people in their vicinity. So if you have kind of segregated residential patterns, you're going to have intra-ethnic killing. But anyway, yeah.
So I don't know. Where you go from here is very difficult. We had Rodney King how many years ago? We had the riots in D.C. and it was kind of. I think for a flash, a nanosecond, maybe the time it took for the Big Bang to explode, after Obama was elected, a few people thought, well, maybe this country was becoming, what they call post-racial. But, I mean, it just seems more and more that we are about as non-post-racial as we can be at this point in time.
Well, and you see how Obama's race in some ways makes it harder for him when he makes a statement after something like this, because he's conscious, presumably, of the right, perceiving him as just kind of pleading his own people's case, or however they would put it.
And I do think the election of a black president did drive some Americans crazy. It's hard to say what's in anyone else's heart, but whether it's the whole birther stuff, the secret Muslim stuff, I mean, there has been a racial theme to a good portion of the Obama hatred that has been expressed over the last 6-7 years, and there's just no denying that. It's created a backlash, and I think that I don't think anybody. I mean, I didn't foresee that happening. I'll just speak for myself, and I think you're right. It has made it more complicated and tougher for him to be president, which is already a pretty damn tough thing to do.
So all this sadly is true, but lest we end on a note we begin with, which is that the world is falling apart, we're going to end on a positive note, David.
Okay.
And for that, we turn to you. What is it? What is it? What is the positive note?
Oh, my, a positive note. Well, you didn't give me any warning on this one. I thought the immigration action and the speech was positive, though it's going to create another political shitstorm. Yep. There is that. I'm looking at the TV. It says reaction and rage right now. That's not going to help me with a positive note. Anything in the world of technology, I don't care about Google Glass so much.
It's dead. Maybe that's the good news, is that Google Glass is basically dead. We will not have to live in a world of glass holes.
That might be good. Amazon is, and Hachette have sort of walked back.
Just been made up?
Has walked back from the brink.
The publisher of my last book, by the way. Happy to see
yes. Let's see what else. True Detective is coming back. There's good news.
What's not to like?
Actually, the best news these days is there's just an amazing amount of good TV out there. It means we don't read as much, and that troubles me. That's sort of the bad news side of that. But I am just stunned by how much time I can spend watching pretty good TV.
Well, the economics have changed. I mean, now you can have a successful show that only has a few million people following it, so they can target your demographic, David Korn.
Oh, they do.
Extremely smart and well-educated people. And by the way, that was somewhat true of the last golden age of television, what they called in the 50s, before all that many people had TVs. But it's true. It's a problem. I basically avoid it. Like, I had to forcefully prevent myself from sticking with Breaking Bad after season 2. I started watching it way late when it was almost the whole thing was wrapped up. And I watched the first 2 seasons, and I was just like, no. And that's...
Well, I watched it earlier this year. Binge watched it over 2 months, and so I didn't see it around, but I ended up liking it and getting hooked.
That was very good.
But and I did it very fast. My daughter's enjoying high school. That's a good thing.
That is a great thing. When kids get to the age where their happiness is far from assured and they're happy. So we will close on that note.
Yes.
Your daughter is happy.
My daughter seems...
She is blissfully oblivious to the collapse of the world around her.
No. She is totally caught up in social media and is bombarded day in, day out with data, of all various assortments. But she seems happy.
We will definitely close on that note. We all wish her well. And we'll see you next time. Maybe with, who knows, maybe with Jim Pinkerton. But at some point we will... If we have to forcibly detain you, we will get you back on the site.
We're doing that right now?
Yeah. I only exerted mild coercion.
I didn't leave Blogging Heads. Blogging Heads left me.
Oh, I thought you were going to say, I'm still big. It's Blogging Heads that got little.
That's a good one, too.
Yeah, well, don't spread it around. Okay, well, thanks, David.
See you, Bob.
See ya.